Good news, everyone! Tonight, big news out of Montana. A Hamilton woman has reason to smile again, and more. Good news starts right now. First up, though I'm sure it'll be mentioned in other parts of tonight's program, I do have to pre-record these segments, and I would be remiss if I did not mention the wedding. Yes, journalist Aaron Reed and Representative Zoe Zephyr, two beloved trans icons, both advocating in powerful ways in their respective disciplines for trans rights and human rights generally, got hitched in Missoula, Montana. So I can't begin to describe how truly awesome this is for those of us in the community who, let's say, shall be facing uncertain futures. It's really cool to see a love of two such vital and passionate people blossom. And I could go on and on about it, but I don't want to step on anyone else's toes on this one. It just had to be mentioned. But there's more out of Montana this week. For instance, a Montana judge blocks a rule preventing trans people from changing their sex on documents. This is from the Associated Press. And a quick caveat, as many of you are probably aware, in most of the states in the United States, there is no distinction between sex markers and gender markers on identity documents. So the terms get conflated in legal settings because there is no difference on the documents in question. So bear that in mind as we go forward. Helena, Montana. A state judge in Montana has temporarily blocked policies that prevented transgender people from changing their sex designations on their birth certificates and driver's licenses. District Judge Mike Menahan issued his order Monday, blocking the rule while the case moves through the courts. Menahan said it was not necessary at this point in the litigation to determine whether transgender Montanans constitute a special class on the basis of their transgender status, but he disagreed with the state's argument that discrimination on the basis of transgender status is not discrimination on the basis of sex. And this derives directly from a United States Supreme Court ruling. The two are inextricably linked because you cannot consider that a person is transgender without acknowledging the matter of sex. They're kind of related. Quote, if the challenged state actions discriminate against a transgender individual on the basis of their transgender status, they also necessarily discriminate on the basis of sex, he wrote, which is objectively true. The case was filed in April by two transgender women on behalf of themselves and others who have been unable to obtain documents, quote, that accurately reflect their sex, the complaint said. One rule blocks transgender people born in Montana from changing the sex designation on their birth certificates. A different policy prevents transgender residents from changing the sex on their driver's licenses without an amended birth certificate, which they cannot obtain if they were born in Montana. Neat how that works. Plaintiff Jessica Karlik, who was born in Montana, said in a statement Tuesday that she was frustrated that while, quote, being able to live my life openly as the woman I know myself to be, Montana wants me to carry around a birth certificate that incorrectly lists my sex as male. Birth certificates and driver's licenses are needed to apply for a marriage license, a passport, to vote, or even to buy a hunting license, Alex Raitt, legal counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union of Montana, argued last month. Each time a transgender person is required to produce a document that does not accurately reflect their sex, they are forced to out themselves as transgender. The state has argued that sex is binary, which is false, either male or female, which is false, and that being transgender is not a protected class of people who could have their constitutional rights to privacy violated. Two problems. The first is, does that mean that they're an unprotected class of people and therefore it is fine to violate their privacy? Are general citizens of Montana's privacies not to be respected? But more importantly, if you're targeting a group specifically, isn't that special enough to consider them a special category? I mean, you're making us a special category by targeting a law specifically at us. So in that context, are we not special? You can't have it both ways, my guy. He says, quote, "The right to privacy does not include a right to replace an objective fact of biological sex on a government document." Assistant Attorney General Alwyn Lansing argued for the state. And he's right, sort of. Sex is not a biologically observable fact. Well, it's complicated. Again, we're conflating sex and gender considerably on this, but biologists will tell you there are several different ways biologists determine sex. None of them have only two exclusive options, and many of them have different indications. For example, a person, or an animal for that matter, could be phenotypically male, but genetically female. And there's mixtures among those as well. There's mixed characteristics in many examples, both in humans and in the rest of the animal kingdom. And genetically, it gets even weirder because virtually every chromosome can have dozens of different kinds of anomalies, discrepancies, duplications, etc. This isn't a bio lesson. The point here is that saying an objective fact of biological sex is not a statement that has any actual meaning. Chase Shower, spokesperson for the Department of Justice, which includes the Motor Vehicle Division, said, quote, "The judiciary has once again defied the democratic will of Montanans by siding with special interest groups and the left's radical leftist ideology." Wow, the left's leftist ideology. That's a hot take, bud. That's some quick thinking. You've got a hell of a vocabulary there. The agency hasn't decided whether it will appeal the injunction. The State Department of Health, which issues birth certificates, does not comment on pending litigation. Spokesperson John Elbett commented about the pending litigation. The case is the latest volley in a series of laws, rules, and legal challenges over efforts by Republicans in Montana and many other states to limit the rights of transgender residents. The state has used various justifications in banning changes to identity documents, including needing accurate statistical records, which is a reason to allow changes, or saying someone's biological sex cannot be changed, even though someone's gender identity can, which is also objectively not true. But details. Quote, "The state cannot articulate any legitimate interest in restricting access to accurate identity documents, much less a compelling one," Raitt argued during the hearing before Menahan in November. In late 2017, under Democratic Governor Steve Bullock, the state health department implemented a rule allowing people to change the sex on their birth certificate by signing an affidavit. In 2021, Montana's Republican-controlled legislature and Republican governor Greg Gianforte implemented a law saying transgender people could not change the sex on their birth certificate without having undergone surgery. That law was declared unconstitutionally vague because it did not specify what surgery was required. The state was ordered to return to the 2017 rule. It should be noted, most countries and international organizations have banned rules like that because requiring people to have some certain specific surgeries is tantamount to forced sterilization, which is an actual war crime. And here's Montana's Republican-controlled legislature and Republican governor deliberately trying to implement an actual war crime. Granted, it's not wartime, so I suppose you'd call it a crime against humanity, but still, details. However, in response, the health department, now under Republican management, passed a rule. Since they can't have a law, they'll use a rule, much like the Texas Department of Public Safety driver's license rule, saying nobody can change the sex on their birth certificate unless it was to fix a clerical error. It's worth noting that in the case of a transgender person, a very strong case can be made that having the wrong sex listed on the birth certificate constitutes a clerical error, sort of like misspelling a name. You have the wrong letter there. Montana's legislature in 2023 passed a law defining the word sex in state law as being only male or female, which is not objectively true, and based upon a person's sex assigned at birth, which has a number of different problems relating to a whole bunch of different things, but that's a topic for another time. That law defining sex was overturned as unconstitutional because its title did not accurately explain its purpose. But the ACLU argues that the state is still using it to set policy with regards to driver's license. Yes, just because a law is unconstitutional and has been overturned is no reason to not continue to enforce it. What even are laws? What are laws for? What good are they? It's fine. Minahan's order blocked the 2022 Health Department rule on birth certificates and the Motor Vehicle Division policy that prevented people from changing sex on their driver's license without an amended birth certificate. He also blocked the bill that defined sex as only male or female as it applied to birth certificates and driver's licenses only. Go figure. Montana is one of, how rude. Montana is one of 7 states that did not allow people to change the sex on their birth certificates. 25 states do allow it, including 15 that offer an option to list male, female, or X for non-binary, other, etc. A dozen states allow birth certificate changes following gender-affirming surgical procedures, according to the Movement Advance Project, an advocacy and information organization. 30 states allow people to change their sex on their driver's license. Montana is among 16 states with what the Movement Advance Project calls, quote, a burdensome process. 4 states do not allow a person to change their sex on their driver's license. Montana lawmakers in 2023 passed a bill blocking gender-affirming medical care for transgender youths, and that law was temporarily blocked in September 2023, just before it was to take effect. And the Montana Supreme Court last week upheld that injunction. And that brings us to our second story. Montana Supreme Court upholds lower court ruling that allows gender-affirming care for minors. Now, that's a slightly misworded title because it's not allowing gender-affirming care. It's blocking a law that would prevent care. I understand that's a double negative, and so to many people it means the same thing. But in legal terms, it really very much is not. There is a law blocking care, and this ruling is blocking the law. We have to be cognizant of the real situation, lest we, lose some important ground here. And the first story goes to show that while they argue, oh, it's just to protect the kids, it never stops at the kids. It never stops at the kids. Because that first story was about rules that affect only adults. They give away the game, but they don't care. They've been masked off for a while now. A Montana law banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors will remain temporarily blocked, the state Supreme Court ruled Wednesday, after justices unanimously agreed with a lower court judge who found the law likely violates the state's constitutional right to privacy. The case against the Montana law now goes to trial before District Court Judge Jason Marks in Missoula. Quote, I will never understand why my representatives are working to strip me of my rights and the rights of other transgender kids. Phoebe Cross, a 17-year-old trans boy and lead plaintiff, said in a statement, just as living as a trans teen is difficult enough, the last thing me and my peers need is to have our rights taken away. The Attorney General's office said it looks forward to defending the law. That's an interesting turn of phrase. You want to defend a law that hurts children. Do you look forward to kicking a kitten when you get out of work on Friday afternoons? Do you perhaps do like many other Republicans and put down puppies for pleasure? My goodness. A spokesperson noted that there are recent scientific and legal developments that fall in the state's favor. It should be noted that is not true. This comes as the British government on Wednesday indefinitely banned puberty blockers for children with gender dysphoria, citing an unacceptable safety risk. It should be noted that while it is true the British government indefinitely banned puberty blockers for children with gender dysphoria, but not for cis children, because the experimental drugs have unknown side effects. Never mind. Do as I say, not as I do. Never mind. The safety risk is completely undemonstrated. They have presented nothing of substance to show there is a safety risk. However, there is considerable data, including from Dr. Hilary Cass, author of the infamous Cass Review, which is ostensibly being used to justify this particular ban in the UK, that blocking access to puberty blockers does lead to considerable harm. And we're not talking about the kind of harm that comes from people who have to undergo what would have been unnecessary surgeries later in life if they'd been allowed access to gender-affirming care at a younger age. That's significant enough. But we're talking about loss of lives due to lack of access to life-saving medication. There is a demonstrable and significant safety risk for blocking access to care. But never mind, there's an unacceptable safety risk that is completely undemonstrated, so we need to block the care. It's not fine. It's very much not fine. Quote, in upholding the district court's flawed decision to temporarily block a duly enacted law, the Supreme Court put the well-being of children who have yet to reach puberty at risk by allowing experimental treatments that could lead them to deal with serious and irreversible consequences for the rest of their lives to continue. Spokesperson Chase Shower said, unwittingly projecting the dangers of his own position onto his opposition. Because the fact of the matter is that puberty blockers are completely reversible and they're not experimental. As previously stated, they've been in use for decades and decades on cis children. We know how they work. They work on all children. The point of puberty blockers is to stop puberty, to delay its onset. So there's no differentiation between a trans child and a cis child at that age. They're pre-pubertal. The effects will be the same on both. So we know what the effects will be. My goodness. But there is, he's literally telling on himself here. He says, putting the well-being of children who have yet to reach puberty at risk by allowing experimental treatments that could leave them to deal with serious and irreversible consequences. And forcing a trans child through the wrong puberty definitely leaves them with serious and irreversible consequences, as evidenced by the shit that trans adults have to go through because they weren't able to access care at an age when it would have been optimally effective. But I do digress. The U.S. Supreme Court earlier this month heard arguments over Tennessee's ban on puberty blockers, hormones, or surgery for transgender minors, with observers saying it appeared these justices were likely to uphold the ban. Mixed ideas on that one. It seems to be mostly opinion pieces, and I have heard arguments both ways. This is, after all, the same court that has made several other landmark decisions that heavily favor trans people and the gender and sexual minority community generally. While it is a conservative majority, they don't seem to be the same rabid lunatics who have overtaken Congress and the White House. But we will see. Perhaps I'm overly optimistic. Quote, because Montana's constitutional protections are even stronger than their federal counterparts, transgender youth in Montana can sleep easier tonight knowing that they can continue to thrive for now without this looming threat hanging over their heads, said Kel Olson, an attorney for Lambda Legal. Republican Senator John Fuller, who sponsored the bill, said Wednesday's decision, quote, is an egregious example of the hyper-partisanship of the Montana Supreme Court. Once again, the Republicans are telling on themselves because, do recall, all of these bans are Republicans. Only Republicans, only ever Republicans. They are hyper-partisan. But he's going to project that on everyone else. It's not my fault the building fell down just because I undermined the foundation. Why would you think it's my fault? It's clearly these hyper-partisan contractors who keep saying we need to reinforce the foundation. What are you talking about? He criticized the court for upholding the ability to sterilize and mutilate children. It should be noted, neither of those is true because neither of those is a side effect of puberty blockers, which are used on cis kids who turn out completely normal. It's fine. And denying protection to children, quote, from unscientific and experimental drugs and operations that have grown increasingly evident as a danger to children. It should be noted, none of that's true. There is, as repeatedly referenced, shit tons of scientific evidence showing that they are not experimental, highly efficacious, fully reversible, and generally as safe or safer as any other necessary medication you care to name. And there are no operations on children at this stage in development, at least not for gender affirming reasons. Perhaps they need a hip replacement or something. And this have grown increasingly evident as a danger to children. This is the ultimate self-own because the fact he has to make accusations, he has to make claims about increasing evidence because he has zero evidence to actually present. He can't demonstrate his claims. All he can do is assert them. Fuller hasn't decided if he will bring a similar bill in the 2025 legislature. He's waiting to see how much fundraising he can generate off of making a stink about this one. Legislative debate over Montana's bill drew national attention in the spring of 2023 after Republicans punished Democratic Representative Zoe Zephyr, the first transgender woman elected to the state's legislature, for admonishing lawmakers who supported the bill. The same Zoe Zephyr referenced earlier in the wedding in Missoula. So it's interesting how this all kind of comes full circle, but also longtime viewers may recall just a few weeks ago, we covered Representative Zephyr in our feature about elected trans representatives across the country. And she in particular had a small feature done about her, which we sampled parts of in our broadcast. And it's really touching. You should definitely check out the full thing. The Montana Supreme Court, quote, has reaffirmed what we have known all along. Gender-affirming care saves lives, and like all healthcare decisions, it should be left between doctors and patients, Zephyr said Wednesday. And that is true. Not so much that the Montana Supreme Court has specifically affirmed that gender-affirming care saves lives, but that it is a matter of established fact within the law. It is settled law that gender-affirming care saves lives. There was a decision earlier this year in Arkansas where a 300-page document was produced to coincide with the court's opinion, laying out the evidence. That was I believe it was a U.S. Circuit Court. The link for it is available in the references on betterthanember.com for those of you who want to actually read it for yourselves. But again, it is 300 pages. Suffice it to say, the judge was quite thorough in laying out exactly what we do know. And that fact, that legally established fact, is that it is true scientifically, medically, legally, and ethically that gender-affirming care does save lives. This is settled science and settled law. Now for something totally different. From the CBC, never mind the Yahoo News thing. It is a CBC article. I don't know why this happens, but it's a good news story. It's a very good news story. A community rallies around a 70-year-old transgender actor who lost teeth in an attack near a GSM bar in Hamilton. This is Lisa Stroud. Lisa Stroud has been in a lot of productions, but last spring suffered quite the attack. And well, we're going to get into it, but it does end on a high note. So stick with me here. In this picture, Lisa Stroud flashes a wide smile when she talks about her burgeoning acting career. The 70-year-old Hamilton woman has been in 11 films and television productions, alongside stars such as Josh Hartnett and Kim Cattrall, since first responding to a casting call online in 2021. These days, the trans actor is thankful not just for her line of work, but also getting back the confidence to smile. Stroud went without many teeth and, as a result, acting gigs for 7 months following an attack in March after leaving the Well, Hamilton's only bar marketed to the local GSM community. I can very much relate to having to go for a long period of time with no teeth. It sucks in a lot of ways. Quote, I was grabbed from behind, swung around, and just pummeled in the face over and over again. Stroud described blacking out before waking up. Live broadcasting, folks. Picking up her teeth off the ground. Yes, I know this is a recording, but it's a single piece. I don't have the time to edit because I'm working 5 jobs. And if you want to help with that, you can support us on patreon.com/TheTransPositions. But that's, yeah, we'll talk about that later. Stroud described blacking out before waking up, picking up her teeth off the ground, getting into her car, and driving home. Quote, apparently, I was bleeding quite a bit on the outside of my driver's door. Stroud reported the attack to Hamilton police the next day, but so far, no one has been arrested. She said one of the detectives told her that her experience was, quote, definitely a hate crime. Stroud doesn't understand why anyone would want to target her. She said she has led a peaceful life and hasn't harmed anyone. Quote, my God, I was married. I have a son, she said. I worked at DeFesco for 35 years and I'm a law-abiding citizen. Why is there so much hate out there? Stroud's transition to being an out trans woman took place over decades, an identity she says she's felt inside from her earliest memories. Some stereotypes exist for a reason, folks. She began dressing in feminine clothing at home while a preschooler in the city's West End. After finishing high school at Westdale Secondary, she worked at what's now the ArcelorMittal DeFosco steel mill as a tradesperson with tickets in plumbing, pipe fitting, gas fitting, and steam fitting. She got married and had a son, then got divorced. And here we have a portrait of Lisa herself, well, according to the caption, reflected in her bathroom mirror. But it's pretty neat. It's nice to see art. It's nice to see art of oneself. I know our society has a problem with ego and narcissism, but the vast majority of people are not actually narcissists or egomaniacs. And we're also having a huge crisis in a lack of self-care, in a lack of self-love. A lot of people, because of the way our society is organized, where you're supposed to sacrifice, and put yourself dead last, there's no consideration for yourself. Stuff like this is not narcissistic. And sometimes, especially for trans people, it can be extremely healing. But I do digress. Stroud never let on about her trans identity at work. Quote, it was, a redneck place. But after work, she'd come home, shower and change, and spend the evening as Lisa. She said it has been liberating, not liberating, live broadcasting, to live full-time as Lisa, which began after she retired, and it has been validating to get acting work based on how she looks now and her true identity. Stroud, who goes by the stage name Lisa D, said she also landed roles in Ripple and Wi-Fi, which are currently being filmed. The gigs, she said, wouldn't have been possible without help paying for her new artificial teeth. Her dental work cost $28,000. I assume Canadian, since she's from Hamilton, Ontario. But whatever country, that's a lot of De Niro. $4,000 came from the Hamilton Police Victim Services Division, $9,400 from a fundraiser held by a casting company she works with, and nearly $6,000 from a GoFundMe campaign started by Wolf, a friend from the local GSM community. Here we can see she's holding up a phone photo of herself with the damaged teeth. It looks very painful. Wolf, 35, said they visit with Stroud regularly and were surprised when they saw she was missing several teeth. Quote, "She didn't actually tell me about the assault when it happened," said Wolf, who organizes local queer meetup events. "I went to visit her and she showed me her mouth and I was shocked. Something radical had happened. She wasn't telling anybody until the medical bill started coming in, and she realized she couldn't handle this," Wolf added in an interview Thursday with CBC Hamilton. "I'm not a computer person, but I did my best," they added, referring to setting up the GoFundMe online. Stroud also considered not even telling the police. She said she was left with the impression she may not be their priority after reporting a broad daylight sexual assault that she experienced on a bench near Upper Ottawa Street and Limmeridge Road East in 2022. Quote, "I haven't heard a word since," she said. Hamilton police spokesperson Jackie Penman declined to share information about the investigations into Stroud's two cases, saying, quote, "While we can't comment on specific investigations at times, we face challenges related to the timeliness of reporting, lack of evidence, absence of witnesses, and victim participation," which is a galling thing to say when they have not even attempted to contact the victim for further information in roughly 2 years. But details. We can confirm that the victim services and hate crime units have been engaged. Stroud said the attacks have destroyed her feeling of safety, and the lack of results from the investigations has further fueled her distrust in police when it comes to protecting GSM individuals. Quote, "They've lost all respect from our community." And that's not just because of her own case, but because, according to Lisa, a lack of a police response when protesters attacked the Hamilton Pride event in 2019, sending shockwaves through the community and prompting police to commit to forging better relationships. The attack at Pride, was atrocious, and nothing's changed. But the good news, of course, is that she, because of her community, because of her fellows in acting and the community members in Hamilton around her, and the friendship of Wolf, she has her smile back. And as a person who only recently got her own smile back for the first time after a very long time, I can assure you that is a very, very good feeling. Our meme of the week is brought to you by the illustrious Bumblebee. And and I'm not going to touch this story with the 10-foot pole. It is not good news. But if you understand what this is in reference to, hilarious. And if you too want to be responsible for sending an overacting hypochondriac who scams her own constituents regularly for the purposes of grifting up some fundraising, join us on Discord. Discord, of course, is where the memes live, and there's stacks of resources from Stephanie's pile of goodies and studies and information to memes like this. And also you can tell us about news stories that we might not have been made aware of yet in our good news sections, our other news sections, and also our bad news sections. Stay abreast of what's happening between broadcasts and join the community. If you also want to support what we're doing here, you can back us on Patreon at patreon.com/TheTransPositions and reap heaps of benefits. And doesn't that sound just lovely? Thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been an unusual one. I'm again recording live. I'm working 5 jobs. It's very hard. But we appreciate all of you coming, sticking with us, and being part of this community, especially as times continue to get tougher. And we're going to keep trying to bring you this good news that is so desperately needed in this difficult era. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.